Hey friends, so finally we're gonna talk about now the stored procedures in SQL. So we're gonna start first by deep dive into what is exactly stored procedures, why we need them, what is the difference between it and a query or a Python code. And then after that we have like a mini project where we're gonna prepare the data and then generate reports, and we're gonna put everything in stored procedure. So we're gonna do it step by step together. Okay, so now let's start with the first question. What is exactly stored procedure? And now think about stored procedures like this. Every time you go to a coffee shop, you say, I would like a large coffee with a coconut milk, no sugar and extra whipped cream. And you repeat this over and over each time you go to this coffee shop. And now if you are working with stored procedures, it's gonna be like this. Whenever you go to the coffee shop, you just say, give me my usual. And the barista know exactly what you mean behind that, and you will get exactly your order without specifying and repeating everything word by word. And this is exactly what's gonna happen if you work with stored procedures. So let's have some coffee, right? Alright, so now we can continue. Alright, so now let's start again from the scratch. We have always these two sides. We have the client side and the server side of the database. And what we have learned, we have like a database, and you as a user, you can go and create like different SQL statements. Like for example, you can create like an SQL select statement in order to retrieve data from the database. Or another SQL statement where you are inserting data to the database. And another one, let's say that you are updating the content of your tables, and so on. So you have like different statements in order to interact with the database. Now let's say that what you are doing is not only one-time job, you are keep repeating those steps over and over. So you are always like doing an insert, then an update, and then a select, and you keep repeating that day after day. So now imagine that you are doing something crazy where you go on vacation, but the job should be done. So what you do, you hand over all those select statements to your colleagues, and they have to do it every day as well as you are gone. So you go and give them all those SQL scripts, and you tell them, okay, you have to execute the first query, then the second query, and then the third query. This is of course not a good way on how to do things, because of course there will be some human errors where like the execution of the script is not correct, like first updating then inserting, and things can go wrong. And that's exactly why we have stored procedures in SQL. So what we can do, we can put all those SQL statements together in one frame, in one program, and we call it stored procedure. And now once you do that, all your SQL statements will not stay at the client side, they will be stored now in the server side of the database. So that means in stored procedures, we are storing our SQL statements inside the database. So you don't have to go and hand over your SQL statements to your colleagues. And now all what you have to do in order to interact with your SQL statements is to go and execute the stored procedure. So you write very simple command called execute SP, for example. So with that, you are calling your stored procedure that is stored inside the server. And once you execute this, what can happen? The database is gonna go to the stored procedure and start executing all the SQL statements that you have inside the stored procedure. And it's gonna do it exactly in the order that you have defined. So from top to bottom. So now once the database went through all your SQL statements, it's gonna return back to the user the data that we have from the selects. And with that, things are really easy, and you can tell your colleagues, okay, just execute this stored procedure and the rest can be done from the database. So with that, you minimize the human errors and you make sure that everything can be executed as you wish. And as well as you are back from your vacation, things are easier. You have to just go and execute the stored procedure. So this is what we mean with stored procedure. You can store inside it multiple SQL statements in specific order, and you can save it inside the database. And each time you need your SQL statements, you can go and simply execute them. So now let's have a quick comparison between a normal query, normal SQL statements compared to a stored procedure. So a normal SQL query, you have like select from where and so on. This is like one-time transaction. You are asking the database for one thing and the database is answering. So it is like one-time request. But now on the other hand, in the stored procedures, you have multiple SQL statements, and once you execute the stored procedure, there will be many interactions with the database in one go. So that means you will have multiple transactions that is happening in your stored procedure. So an SQL query, it is like a simple request. You need one thing and you are getting it. But on the other hand, in the stored procedure, it is like a program. As you are writing a code in any programming languages, it is more than one request. It has a lot of stuff. Like for example, you can go and build looping logic where we go and iterate through something, or you can go and build a control flow where you have a logic like the if else statements. So there are like different paths in your code, and as well in programming we have like parameters and variables in order to make our code dynamic and flexible, and as well we can build error handling on our code in order to customize what can happen if there is like an issue. So the stored procedure, it is like having a code, like for example in Python. So that means you can do more complicated stuff compared to a simple query where you have only like one request. So in the stored procedures, you are doing like programming and coding, and it is more advanced than only just having a query. So that means if you are working with stored procedures, things gonna get more complicated and advanced, but of course you will get a lot of flexibility and reusability compared to a simple query. So now there is like another alternative to stored procedures. Well, you can go and put all your SQL statements in a Python code, and things can work as well. So either you put your SQL statements inside the stored procedure or in a Python code. But now the big question is, what are the differences between them? Well, there is like a disadvantage if you're having Python in different server, because you have to go and build a connection between your server and the database server. And connection means always networking, and you might get slightly worse performance. So this is one advantage for the stored procedure. Another advantage for the stored procedure is that all the scripts that you're gonna store inside the stored procedure in the database gonna be pre-compiled. So pre-compiled means the SQL database servers knows already about your SQL statements, and there was already a check whether all your syntaxes are correct, and the database as well gonna be preparing everything to execute the stored procedure, like maybe preparing the execution plans and a lot of stuff. So if you store your SQL statements inside stored procedure in the database, it is very close to the database, and the database knows everything about your scripts and it is ready to execute it. But if you put all your SQL statements outside of the database, of course the database has no chance to understand what is coming, so it cannot go and compile anything until Python sends the code to database. So this is another advantage for the stored procedure. But now if you build your SQL statements in Python, you will get a lot of advantages. Like for example, you can go and build very flexible Python codes where you can use Python features together with the SQL, and with that you open the door of many possibilities and flexibility. Another thing with Python, you can make great version control, so everything is integrated in Python tools. And one more advantage is that if you have a complex requirement in your projects, it's going to be really hard to implement it in stored procedures. It's going to cause you a lot of lines of code and things going to be not comfortable. But if you are implementing a complex logic in Python, things going to be way easier. So with Python, you can implement complex logics very easily compared to the stored procedure. So those are the big differences between the stored procedure and Python. Now, I have to be honest with you about having your code in stored procedure or in Python. Well, if you are working together in a data project, I will never recommend you to use stored procedure if you have the possibility to have your code in Python. And that's because I saw a lot of projects using stored procedure, and most of them ends in chaos. It is really hard to debug, it is really hard to test, it's like catastrophic. So really don't use in your project any stored procedures. Especially if you have like a big project and you have a lot of data and tables and so on, you can manage everything perfectly using Python. Especially if you have platform like Databricks or Snowflakes, then of course the best way to control your data projects is using Python. But of course, if you don't have this possibility and you have only a database server and you can only work with this, then you don't have any other option. You have to work with the stored procedures. But if you have this possibility to put your project inside Python and to run your scripts from there, then it is way better than having stored procedure. Well, this is my opinion. I'm just talking about working in projects, in big projects. But if you have like small projects, few tables and so on, then it's fine to stay with the stored procedure, but never build a big project using stored procedures, because I tell you it will never work. So try to always to think about to have the right platform in order to run your projects. And now I'm thinking about it, maybe I should have put this tip at the end of the video, not in the middle. So whatever, if you still want to learn stored procedures, we're going to continue on that, and I'm going to have like a really nice example about how to build stored procedures step by step, like having a mini projects. So why not learning both of them? So let's go. Okay, so now let's have a quick look to the syntax of the stored procedure. It is very simple. So it has always two parts. First, we have to define the stored procedure. So we can do it like this: create procedure, then we have to define the procedure name, and then we say as, and then we have begin and end. It's very important for SQL to understand when the definition starts and when it ends. And then between the begin and end, we're gonna have a set of SQL statements. So here you can insert whatever you want, insert, update, queries, anything. And once you have defined the stored procedure, the next step is that we're gonna go and execute it. So the syntax is very simple. We're gonna say execute and then the procedure name. So that's it. With that, SQL gonna go to the stored procedure and start executing all the SQL statements that you have in the definition. So this is the syntax of the stored procedure. As I said, it is very simple. Alright guys, so now let's do it step by step. The first step is that we're gonna go and write a query. So let's say that you have a very simple task and it says, for US customers, find the total number of customers and the average score. So let's go and do it. It's very simple. So select count star total customers, and then the average of scores as average score from our table sales customers. And then since it says US customers, we have to go and filter the data based on the column country. Country is equal to USA. So that's it. This is our query. Let's go and execute it. So we have a very quick, nice report about the total number of customers and the average score. So now let's say that I have a weekly meeting and I have to represent this report over and over. So that means I have to go and execute this query like frequently in weekly basis in order to get the data for the report. So now what this means, I have to go and save this query in order to use it later, now that each time I have to rewrite it. So that means I have to store this text somewhere that I don't go and rewrite the query over and over. So what I usually do, let's go and we copy the whole query and then we create a new text, and let's say it's going to be my weekly query and it's going to be SQL. So I'm going to go and edit it, and here I'm going to save my query, and each time I need this query I have to go and copy it, go back to my SQL, and then I'm going to go and paste it in order to execute it. So either you're going to write it each time or copy and paste it. Well, we don't have to do that. We have stored procedures. So that means we're going to go to the step 2 where we're going to turn this query into a stored procedure. So let's do that. It's very simple. So we're going to say create procedure, and now we have to go and give it a name. So it's going to be get customer summary, and then after that we're going to say as, and then we need the begin and end, and in between we're going to put our query. So let's go and copy our query and just put it in between. So that's it. Let's go and execute it. And with that, we have created our stored procedure. And now in order to see our stored procedure, we can go to the Object Explorer, to our database sales DB. And then here we have a folder called programmability. So let's go inside it. And here we have a lot of stuff like functions, triggers, and we have stored procedures. So let's go inside it. And we can see over here, this is our new created stored procedure. So we are almost there. The next step is that we're going to go and call our stored procedure. And this is the easiest part. So it's going to be execute the stored procedure. And the syntax is very simple. So execute and then the name of the stored procedure. So get customer summary. So let's go and execute it. And with that, as you can see, we get the result of our query. So as you can see, it is very simple. In just few steps, we created a stored procedure. And then in the future, you don't need the whole thing. You just go and execute the stored procedure. I don't have to store the query locally at my PC or to copy and paste anything. If I want this report, now I just have to execute the stored procedure like this, and I will get the results. Okay, so now let's keep moving. Now we're going to talk about the parameters inside stored procedures. So what is a parameter? It is like a placeholder where you can pass in information from you into the stored procedure while running it. And using parameters in stored procedure, it's going to make it flexible, reusable, and dynamic. So let's understand what this means. Let's say that you got a new task. So it says, for German customers, find the total number of customers and the average score. So that means now you have like to generate two reports, one for USA and one for Germany, and in both of them you are doing the same aggregation. And again, we have to go and start writing the query. It's going to be very similar to the one that we have in the previous example. So we are doing the same stuff, same aggregations, but the only change here is that we're going to use another value to filter the data. So instead of USA, we're going to go and say here Germany. So let's go and execute this one over here, and with that we can see we have total number of customers too. So this is the report that we have to provide like in weekly basis. And again, in order not to go and copy paste stuff, we're going to go and create a stored procedure for that. At the end, we're going to have an end. But now of course we cannot have like the same names. We're going to go and say here Germany. So let's go and execute it. And the next step, we have to go and execute the stored procedure. So like this, let's go and execute it, and the whole logic now stored inside the database. Let's go and refresh on the Explorer over here, and you can see now we have two stored procedures. But now you have to feel there is something wrong. Always in programming and coding, if you find yourself repeating the same task over and over, then there is always a smarter way on how to optimize that. Repeating stuff in coding is always a bad thing. So now clearly we are repeating the same query in two different stored procedures. And now if you compare them, you see it's because of the value. So we have here the value for the filter, one's Germany and one USA. And those values are a static value, so it's always going to stay inside the stored procedure as USA. But instead of that, we can replace those static values with a parameter. And then you decide as you are executing the stored procedure for which country you want to execute the stored procedure. So let's go and do that. I'm just going to remove everything from here and focus only on the first stored procedure. Now what we're going to do, after giving the name of our stored procedure, we have to define our parameter. So it starts with @ and with that SQL understand, now we are talking about parameters, and we need now the name of the parameter. So it's going to be country. It could be any name that you want. And after that, we have to define for SQL the data type. It's like when you are creating a table and you define columns, you assign a data type for each column. The same thing here, you have to assign as well a data type for each parameter. So we're going to use the data type in varchar, and for the countries, it's enough to have the length of 50. So with that, we are telling SQL, for this stored procedure, we can pass an information to the stored procedure, and this information and value going to be used inside this parameter. So now after we defined this parameter over here, we can go and use it anywhere inside our query. And of course, we want to go and use it instead of this static value. So now we're going to remove this static value, and instead we're going to have the parameter. So now we are saying you're going to filter the table based on the value that comes from the user and not anymore static with the USA. And as I said, you can use this parameter everywhere, like even here in the select statements. So it is a value that could be used everywhere in your query. So that's it. We have defined our new parameter and we have used this parameter in our query. So now we have to go and update the stored procedure. We cannot leave it as create. Instead of that, we're going to say alter. So we are saying alter stored procedure and with the new informations. Let's go and execute it. And now we have to go and execute it. So now what we're going to do, we're going to say execute get customer summary. But now our stored procedure is expecting a value from you, from the input. So we're going to do it exactly like we've done in the name over here. So we're going to say the parameter country is equal to Germany. So that means the value of this parameter come from me, come from the input, and this information can be passed to my query, to the stored procedure. So let's go and execute it. And with that, as you can see, we are getting the report of customers for Germany. And now if you say, okay, let's go and generate the report for USA, all what you have to do is that replace the parameter. So in the value, instead of Germany, we're going to say USA. So let's go and execute it. Great, now we are getting as well the report for US customers. So that means, my friends, for those two reports, I just need one stored procedure. And with the help of the parameter, I made my stored procedure now more flexible and professional. So this is exactly the power of the parameters. It makes everything reusable and dynamic. And now, of course, we don't need the stored procedure for Germany. So what we can do, we can go and drop it. So we're going to say drop procedure, and it was like this, Germany. So we don't need this stored procedure, and we're gonna stay with only one dynamic stored procedure. So this is how to use parameters in stored procedure and why it's important. Okay, so now to the next step is that we can go and add default values for the parameters. So let's say that I execute very frequently this report where I say the country equal to USA, and I don't want each time to define the parameter value equal to USA. So if you are using a value very frequently, you can add it as a default inside the definition of the stored procedure. And it is very simple. So if you go to the definition again over here after the parameter and you say equal to USA. So now it's very important to understand that the country will not be always equal to USA. It is just you are saying, if I don't get from the user any value, then as a default, I'm gonna go and use the USA. So let's go and again change the definition of our stored procedure using alter. So execute. And now we can go to our stored procedure and I can skip the whole thing over here and execute it. So now as a default, I'm getting the report of USA without passing any information to the stored procedure because I know it is as a default USA. But if you need it as a Germany, of course, you have to go and define it. So you say execute the stored procedure where the country equal to Germany. So if you execute it like this, SQL still gonna use your value. So the value that comes as an input from the user has more priority, of course, as the default. And with that, we are getting the Germany reports. So as you can see, it's really nice, right? Using parameters in stored procedure. Alright, moving on to the next step. Now we're going to work with multiple queries inside one stored procedure. And this is what we have learned at the start. We can have multiple SQL statements in one stored procedure. And now we have a new report and query to generate. It says find the total number of orders and the total sales. So let's do it quickly. We're going to write it like this. Select counts order ID, this is the total orders, and then the sum of sales, total sales, from our table sales orders. And of course, we are always creating a report based on a specific country. So that means we have to go and join it with the customers table in order to filter the data. So on customer ID equal to the customer ID. And now we're going to go and filter the data. So country equal to USA. So something like this. Let's go and execute it. And with that, for the US customers, we have 6 orders and the total sales 180. And of course, the same thing we're gonna do for Germany. So now, of course, we will not go and create an extra stored procedure for this. We're gonna go and put everything in one stored procedure. So let's go and copy the whole thing and put it here inside. So after the first report, we're going to have the second report. And now the best practice here, if you have multiple queries in stored procedure, go and add at the end of each query a semicolon. It is just easier to understand, now this is the end of this query. Especially if you have like a big complex queries where you have CTE, union, and so on, it's gonna be really hard to understand that we are talking now about completely new query. But it is not like something the database requires it, but it's just easier to read. So just add semicolons at the end of each query. So now let's go and execute the whole thing in order to change the definition of our query. And one more thing, of course, don't forget, we don't need static values over here. We're gonna go and add our nice parameters. So add country. So I think with that, we have everything is ready to be executed. So let's go and change the definition of our stored procedure. And now let's go and start with the defaults where the country equal to USA. So let's go and execute it. And now in the output, as you can see, we have 2 results. And that's because we have 2 queries. So the first report is for the first query and the second one for the new one that we just created. And the same thing, if you go and execute the stored procedure for Germany, we will get as well 2 results results, and here we can see we have 4 orders and 200 of total sales for Germany. So as you can see, it's very simple. You can go now and add multiple SQL statements, not only queries. You can go and update, you can do an insert, delete, any kind of SQL statements. You can just go and add it inside your program. And as usual, SQL gonna execute it from the top to the bottom. So since this is the first SQL statement, it's gonna execute it first, and then after that, it's gonna go to the next one. So this is how you can add multiple SQL statements to your stored procedure. Alright everyone, so now we're going to talk about the variables. So what is a variable? It is like a placeholder where you store inside it a value in order to use it later inside your stored procedure. So that means variable holds like a value inside the memory, and you can reuse it everywhere you want inside your stored procedure, but it's not like the parameters. Parameters are something like outside the stored procedure. It's an input from the one that is executing the stored procedure, and the stored procedure has to adapt with the parameter. But a variable, it's something that lives inside the stored procedure, and we use it as developers in order to make our code dynamic and to move a value from one place to another. So let's have a very simple example. Now let's say that we don't want our report here about the total customers as a query. So I don't want it as a result in the output. Let's say I'm generating a report always like this. We are saying the total customers from Germany equal to 2 and the average score from Germany is equal to 425. So I need it as a text, not as a table like here. So in order to do that, we can use the TSQL print in order to give a message after executing the stored procedure. So the syntax of print is very simple. So we can go over here and say print, and then we have single quotes. And let's go and get the whole message from here without the comments and then the semicolon. And we can repeat that for the second message. So for the average score, and we put it over here as well, a semicolon. Now if you do it like this message gonna be always static, so we will have always like 2 for the total customers, and the average score gonna always be like this, even though that the data is changing. So we cannot have it static like this. We have to make it dynamic, and especially if we are calling this function for USA, so we cannot have it here as a Germany. So let's see how we can make this dynamic. Now let's start with the easy stuff. Instead of the Germany over here, we can go and put our parameter, right? So instead of this, so we're gonna say at country, but now the problem is it is part of the whole string. We cannot do that, so we're gonna stop the text, and now you can see the coloring is changing, and then have a plus in order to have concatenations. So this text comes first, then the value from the country, and then we're gonna have as well the double point as a static text, and again a concatenation, and then we have the 2 we can talk about later. So let's do the same stuff over here. So we're gonna say plus at country. Coloring is not changing because of this quote, so let me just remove it, and then afterward a plus, make it static, again a plus, and remove the final quotes. So with that, in the message we have now dynamic, where we get the value of the country from the parameter. And now we come to the interesting parts. We have here an issue. Those 2 values, they come from this query. And of course, we cannot use a parameter for that. We have to use now the variables. Now, in order to make variables, we have 3 steps. The first step is that we have to tell SQL about our new variable. So SQL can prepare and make like placeholder for it in the memory. So we have to tell SQL and prepare it with our new variables. Now, usually we do all the declarations of our variables at the start of the stored procedure, immediately after begin. So that means we're going to go over here and say declare. And now after that, it's like the parameters. It's very simple. So at total customers. So this is the name of the variable. And after that, we have to define the data type. Of course, you have to understand the data type from the query. Since we are saying count star, then the output gonna be an integer. That's why we're gonna write it like this. So integer. And now we need another one for the average. So what we're gonna do, we can make a comma. Now we are declaring another variable. So at average score. And the data type of this one gonna be a float because we have an average. So that's it for the first step. We are telling SQL we have 2 variables, and SQL gonna go and create an empty placeholder. So now in the second step, we have to give our variables a value. So where we're gonna get the values, we're gonna get it from the query. So let's do that. Now let's start with the first column. As you can see, we have here the count star. And as we learned, anything that we write on the right side, it's going to be like an alias for the column. But in SQL, if you go and write something before it, it's going to be the variable. So we can do it like this, at total customers. and then equal. So now we are saying whatever value this query returns, it should be stored inside my new variable, so that I'm assigning values to my variable. But here there is one thing, that we cannot have any more aliases because our query will not return any results. Our query has now only one task, to assign values to my variables, so that's why we cannot have it like this. We have to remove the alias, and the same thing we're gonna do it for the average. So at average score equal to the average score, and we have to remove the alias. So that's it. Now our query having different purpose. It is not for returning result, it is to assign values to our variables. So now we have values. In the next step, we have to go and use it. And we can use our variables everywhere inside our stored procedure. So it could be in the print, it could be in the next query, so in any select statements in any place. Sometimes we use variables in order to pass an information from one query to another one. But in this example, we want to use our variables inside the prints. So it is very simple. Now we're gonna go and replace the static number, and it's like the parameter. We're gonna say at total customers, and the same thing for the average, at average score. So that's it. It's very simple. So again, the step one, we have to declare them, to define it for SQL, and with that we're gonna get an empty variable. The second step, we have to add values to those variables, and the last step, we have to go and use those variables. So it makes sense, right? Now, if you check our message over here, you can see that everything is dynamic and we don't have any static values. But there is one more thing, that in the print, everything should be as a string. So we cannot have dates, numbers, floats, and so on. So that's why you have to make check if you are adding any parameter and variables, all of them should be string. So the country, it is okay because we have the data type of varchar, but the total number and the average score, this is not really good because they have different data type, and we have to go and now cast those data types to another one. So we're gonna say cast, and we're gonna say here as in varchar, so that we don't get any errors from SQL. So cast as well here as in varchar, like this. All right, so I think we are ready. Let's go and change the definition of our stored procedure in order to test. So let's go and execute. Perfect. And now let's go and test. So let's start with the defaults, where we have the parameter as USA. So now as you can see, we are getting one result, and this is from the second query. So the first query is not returning anything anymore in the output. But if you go to the messages over here, you can see we have a new message. It says total customers from USA is equal to 3, and the average score from USA is equal to 825. And this is exactly what we wanted for our reports. Now let's go and execute the parameter equal to Germany. Again, we have only one result, and in the messages, we're gonna get total customers from Germany is equal to 2, and the average score from Germany is equal to 425. So this is exactly how we work with the variables. We use it in order to hold one information in one place in order to reuse it later in different place. So that's it for variables. Alright everyone, now we're going to talk about how to control the flow in your stored procedure. And we're going to learn how to do that using the if-else statements. So now let's have the following scenario. Now if you check our query over here, we are doing the average of score. And if you check the data, you can see that in the scores we have nulls. And nulls are really bad for aggregations. So we usually have to clean up our data before doing any aggregations. And in this scenario, we can understand null as a 0. And how we're going to clean up and handle the data, we're going to go and make an update on our table where we say if there is like a null, then make it as a 0. And we will do this as a pre-step inside our stored procedure. So that means first we have to clean up the data, and then afterwards we're going to generate the reports. And this is what we usually do inside SQL projects. So the logic can be very simple. We have to check first, do we have nulls inside the score? If the answer is yes, then we have to go and update the null values to 0. But if the answer is no, we don't have any values, then we can skip everything. So now we're gonna go and build this logic inside our stored procedure in order to clean up and prepare the data. So let's go. Okay, so now this part, we're gonna call it generating reports. And we're gonna have another part called prepare and clean up data. So now let's prepare first the structure of the if-else statements. So the syntax is gonna look like this. So if, and then begin and end. So this is the block of the if, and we're gonna do the same thing for the else. So we have else, and we have begin and ends. Let me just separate them. So now how this works, we have to create a condition. If the condition is met, then the if statement can be executed, but if the condition is not fulfilled and we have false, then the else statement can be executed. So what is the condition? We have to check whether there is null inside the scores. So let's write a very simple query. It's gonna say select one from sales customers where score is null. And always we have to check the country equal to, let's say, USA. So let's go and execute this one over here. So now we are getting in the output a result. If we are getting a result, that means somewhere there are nulls. But if you go, for example, and say here Germany and execute the same query, in the output you see that we don't have any results. That means for the German customers, we don't have any nulls in their scores. So if this query returns something, we have nulls. If it didn't return anything, then there is no nulls. And we're gonna use exactly this query as a condition. So we're gonna take our check and say if exists, and then two parentheses, and then we put our query. So what we are saying, if exist, if this query return anything, then go and execute the next block. And if it does not exist, that means it is not returning anything, then go and execute the second block. So it's a logic, right? It's very simple. Now, of course, instead of having a static value over here, we can use our parameter. So at country, and now we have to tell SQL what to do if it exists. So in between we can have like an update statement. So update sales customers, and we're gonna set the score equal to 0. But very important, we have to go and use where condition, otherwise it's gonna go and update everything. The score is null and the country equal to our parameter country. So with that, we are updating exactly the nulls for specific country. And let's have a semicolon at the end. And at the start, maybe I'm gonna say, just to have a nice message in the output, print, and we can have a message, updating null scores to 0. And as well a semicolon at the end. So if there is any nulls, then execute the whole thing, print the message, and update the table. So now the next step is that we're gonna go and tell SQL what can happen if the condition is not fulfilled. That means we don't have any nulls. Well, we don't have to update the table at all, because we don't have to clean up anything, but I'm gonna go and make print over here. So print, and we're gonna give the message, no null scores found. And at the last end, I'm gonna go and put a semicolon. So that's it. This is our logic. We are checking our condition, and then we execute if the condition is met, where we update the table with 0 instead of null. And if the condition is not met, then don't do anything, just print a message. Now you might say, you know what, why you are doing this? We just can use this update statements and we don't need the whole if-else statements. So why we are checking in the first place? I can, like, each time I run this stored procedure, I go and update all the nulls if they exist to a 0. Well, this is not really professional because you are wasting resources. So each time you run an update statement like this, so imagine that you have a big table and each time you run your stored procedure, SQL have to go and check whether there is any nulls and so on. And this is of course consume resources. It's way better if you go and check first whether it's really needed. So that's why we are doing this logic. Now, as you can see, our stored procedure is getting bigger and bigger. So we have like two parts. The first part is preparing and cleaning up the data, and the second part we are generating reports. Let's go and update the whole thing and execute it, and now we have to do it step by step. So let's check our query over here, and you can see we have here a null for USA customers. So let's go first execute it for the USA as a default, and now let's go and check the messages. It's saying updating null scores to 0. That means the first block is executed because SQL did find a customer with a null, and with that the average of scores gonna be different than previously. So we have now more accurate average in our reports. So if you go and check our query again, you can see now we have a 0 instead of null. Let's go and execute it for Germany, like this. And let's go and check the messages. It says no null scores found. And that is correct because for Germany, we don't have any nulls. So with that, we have created a control flow using the FL statements. And as you can see, we are not doing any more like simple queries. We are creating like a mini program. And now it's like an ETL, where first we prepare the data and second we generate the reports. And you can imagine in real projects how big those stored procedures gonna get, where you have a lot of tables and a lot of things to do. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the error handling in stored procedure. Error handling, it is like essential things to do while programming because it gives you the control on what can happen once you have an error. And there is a lot of things that you can do, like maybe deleting data, printing a very structured like message, or maybe doing some logging and so on. So you have a full control on what to do if there is an error. And of course, we can do that in the stored procedure. So now let's check quickly the syntax. It is usually has two parts. The first part is the try part. So the syntax is like this: begin try, end try. So you are defining the boundaries of the try, and in between you can have all your SQL statements and your code. And the second part gonna be the catch parts. So you say begin catch and end catch, so you are defining the boundaries, and then in between you can tell SQL what to do if there is like an error. So what is try and catch? Like the word it says, try, it's like you are attempting to do something that might fail. So you are telling SQL, try to execute this code. So the SQL gonna go and try to execute your code, and if any error happens while executing your code, the SQL gonna jump to the second block and start doing whatever you have defined in the catch. But if there is no errors at all, this part will not be executed. So the catch is like your backup plan. If something goes wrong here, then go to the plan B and do something. So let's see the workflow of the try catch. So first, the SQL gonna go and execute the try, and then it's gonna check, is there any error? If we don't have any error, then everything ends and that's it. But while execution, if the SQL face any error, what's gonna happen? It's gonna go and execute the catch. So as you can see, the workflow is very simple, and this is what we mean with try and catch. So let's go back to SQL to have some example. Alright, so now back to our stored procedure. Let's go and introduce an error inside our code. So let's go over here, and maybe in our query, we're gonna go and divide by 0, which is of course a problem. So we have this error over here, and let's go and update the logic of our stored procedure. And now if you go and execute it, so let's go and do that, we will get an error saying, yeah, you cannot divide by 0. But now what I would like to do, I would like to have something else where we have customized message when error happens. So I would like to have the control on which information should be displayed if there is an issue. And in order to do that, we have to use the try and catch. So it's going to be very simple. Now, this is my whole code. So the whole thing from preparing to generate the report, the whole thing is my code. And we have to put the whole thing in a try. So how to do that? Exactly after the first begin, we're going to have another begin, but for the try. And now what we're going to do, we're going to go to the last end over here and have an end try. So with that, we put now the whole code inside the try. And after that, we can introduce the catch. So begin, catch, and end catch. And now in between, we have to tell SQL what can happen if we encounter any error. And here we can do many stuff, but I would like now to focus on customizing the error message. Let's start with the first one. So I'm going to say print, let's say an error occurred. This is the first thing. Then on the next line, I'm going to print more informations. And now we're going to say the error message. So error message, double point, space. And now we can go and use some predefined functions from SQL, like for example, the error message. This function gonna return the description of the error, like the one we have here, divide by 0 error encountered. And we can go and keep adding stuff the way that we need, like maybe the error number. So we can have it like this. And for that, we have as well a function called error number. And I think we have to cast this one because it is a number, and in the messages we have to have only a varchar. So this is gonna be as in varchar, like this. And we can keep adding stuff to our message. Like for example, let's take the error line. And for that we have as well a function. So it's gonna be the error line, like this. And we have to cast it because it is as well a number. And as well, what is really important is the name of the stored procedure. So error procedure, and we have a function for that, error procedure, like this. It's gonna be a string, so that's why I don't have to cast it. So now with that, we have defined for SQL what to do if there is like an error in our code. So let's go and execute the whole thing. And now let's go and execute our stored procedure. So let's go and do that. So now as you can see in the output, we are not getting any results. and it is not giving an error. But if you go to the messages, you will see a very nice message. So it says an error is occurred. The error message is divided by 0, and we have the error number, in which line, and as well the stored procedure name. So as you can see, it's amazing. This is how we use the try and catch in order to have more options on to control what can happen if there is an error. Now the next step, what I'm gonna do, we have to go and organize our stored procedure. As you can see, everything is getting bigger. So now what we usually do, we use tab in order to make spaces between each section. So now the first section is between the first begin and the last end. So we have to go and mark everything and hit once a tab. So now it is easier to read. Now the whole thing is our codes. So now the next level is the block of the try. So the whole thing over here is the try. So let's go and do that. I'm just gonna mark everything until here and then hit tab. So now we can see it better, right? And the same thing for the catch. I think I have already done that, so it's already pushed. Now we go to the next level. So between this begin and end, everything is pushed. So this looks nice. The same thing over here, it's pushed as well. And then we don't have here any begin and end, so it looks okay. And the same thing over here. So all our begin and end is now sorted correctly. Now the next step is that we can go and improve the comments a little bit. So we can split our code into multiple sections. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go over here and say this is step 1. And what I like to do is to go and add separation using the equals or any special character that you like, and as well here. So with that, we have the first step, we are preparing the data, and then let's go and copy the whole thing, go over here and say this is the step 2, and we're gonna say this is generating summary reports and something like this. And of course below that we can say what is this report about. So calculate total customers and average score for specific country. And as well we can go over here and add as well a comment. Calculate total number of orders and total sales for specific country. And of course we have to go and remove this error over here, otherwise we'll get an error. And we can go and add something about the catch, where we can say like this, again a few comments. We're gonna say error handling. So let's go and execute it again in order to make sure we have the newest version. And with that we are done. We have a really nice stored procedure with multiple steps, and we have it professional where we have error handling inside it, and everything looks well organized and easy to read. So this is how we build stored procedures. Alright friends, so that's all about the stored procedure. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. It is like a mini programming or mini coding in SQL. And now in the next step we're going to talk about the SQL triggers. If you like this video and you want me to create more content like this, I'm gonna really appreciate it if you support the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. All those stuff gonna help the channel with the YouTube algorithm, and as well my content gonna reach the others. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye.